Hi, my name is Harmony. I struggle with codependency. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus. I struggle with codependency, and I am no longer in a relationship with a sexually addicted man. I grew up in a violent home, in a violent neighborhood. My mother struggled with addiction to cocaine, and my father left before I was a year old. One of my earliest memories is of him watching porn in the bed next to me during one of my weekend visits. I couldn't have been older than 3 or 4. It's only in the past few years that I realized that my first relationship with a sexually addicted man was with my own father. My dad left the state when I was 5 years old, and I saw him about a dozen times throughout my childhood after that. Other people picked up where he left off. I was sexually abused by multiple people, both men and women, throughout my childhood and raped as a teen. The abuse left me filled with shame and anger towards myself, and I thought that there was something inherently wrong with me that kept attracting that kind of attention. My mother met my stepfather when I was 2 years old. The relationship was violent and volatile. My stepfather tells me that when I was 5 years old, I stood in front of my mother, who was pregnant at the time, with my arms outstretched, trying to protect her from him. He had a chair raised above his head and was about to hit her with it until he realized that I was there. I can remember lying in bed at night listening to dishes crashing as they fought in the next room. Sometimes when the fights got particularly escalated, my stepdad would drag my mother into the bedroom I shared with my younger brother, turn on all of the lights in a fit of rage, and he would tell us that the reason we don't have any food was because my mother was a cokehead and was snorting all of the cocaine he was trying to sell. My mother would just stand there crying. Each time he berated her, I would beg my dad to stop, and he would get angry with me for taking her side and storm out of the room, leaving me to comfort my mother. Early on, I learned that it was my job to make sure that my mother was okay. I realized that her feelings determined the emotional climate of our home, and as long as I could keep her happy, I had a shot at living in peace. When I was 13, my mother allowed her new boyfriend to move into our home. She met him in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting after he fled Canada in order to escape statutory rape charges for having sex with a minor. He made sexual advances towards me in front of my mother and even went so far as to tell her that he was in love with me. I told her that he kept coming into my room at night and asked her to stop him. She responded with a lecture about my wardrobe and explained that if I wore long pants and stopped practicing my dance routines in the living room, this wouldn't be happening. Through all of this, I learned from her that it was my responsibility to control other people's sexual responses towards me. Fed up, I finally ran away from home for the first of many times. Realizing I was serious about wanting her boyfriend gone, my mother asked him to leave. When he decided to head back to Canada, she followed him there, leaving me at 13 with my 8-year-old brother with nothing but $20 and a book of food stamps. After the money and food stamps ran out, I started stealing from the liquor store to feed my brother and I. And I remember making my brother wait outside while I went into the liquor store because I didn't want him to get caught. And I didn't want anything to happen to him if I got arrested. It was that summer that I lost my virginity to the first boy who told me he loved me. We broke up a couple of months later, but he seemed to still think that he deserved boyfriend privileges. He raped me more than 30 times over the course of the next year. It wasn't until decades later that I realized that he too was sexually addicted. The summer my mom left, I also began a friendship with another boy from my neighborhood. When he realized my brother and I had been left alone, he started coming around more often. When he was around, I didn't have to worry about stealing because he would buy us food. Wise to the streets with several older siblings in the life, he made me feel protected in our gang-ridden neighborhood. Anybody messes with you, I've got your back, he would tell me. My mom eventually came back from Canada. The following year, she was in a new relationship. She spent at least 5 nights a week at her boyfriend's house. Meanwhile, in order to make ends meet, she began renting our home to a number of random people, including the boy from our neighborhood. I shared a bedroom with him, my brother, another boy, and a guy who was a drug dealer. At one point, my mom had 9 people living in our 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, including a woman who claimed to be psychic and another woman with active schizophrenia. Colorful. As the boy from my neighborhood and I grew closer, he also became more abusive and controlling. I was so desperate for the attention and presence of a male in my life that I mistook his control for care and concern. I was so filled with self-loathing that his name-calling and hurtful words only validated what I already believed to be true about myself. The more abusive he became, the more I became attached to him. And he told me that nobody else would ever put up with me, and I believed him. One day we were on Lincoln Boulevard, a track in Venice, when he looked at me and said, "I could sell you if I wanted to." I didn't understand what he was talking about until he looked at the next person walking by and said, "Anybody got a nickel?" This marked the beginning of him trying to figure out how he would make money off of me. It started with him borrowing money here and there and sometimes stealing it from me. And even though he was abusive and thieving, he was present and he never raped me. That was more than I could say for any other male in my life. I came to believe that I needed him, that I would die without him. He had convinced me of this. At 15, I was giving him whatever money I had from my job at the beach. And by 17, I was fully supporting him by stealing from the cash register at work. At 18 years old, when I was 18, his mother had a stroke and we moved in to take care of her. Financial pressure built as her medical bills piled high and my boyfriend's spending habits continued to escalate. By the time I was 19 years old, I was over $35,000 in debt and I was losing control. I looked for a second job, but none of them would make ends meet. My boyfriend began pressuring me to commit crimes in order to pay our bills as I had done in the past. His rationale that I would be less likely to get caught than he would. I was reluctant to do this since I was legally an adult and afraid of ending up with a permanent record. Young, naive, and hopeless, seeing no other options, I began stripping. It seemed a better alternative to theft, fraud, and the risk of going to jail. My boyfriend told me that I would only have to work for a couple of more months in order to pay off some bills, and then I could return to a normal life. Instead, I found myself trapped in the lifestyle. Codependently, I felt a false sense of control through supporting him financially. I thought that as long as I could make him need me, then he wouldn't leave me. In essence, my boyfriend became my pimp. Every night I came home and gave him all of my money, and I had convinced myself that I didn't deserve it anyway. His vision of selling me finally came to pass. At the time, I would have said that financial problems were my main reason for ending up working in the strip clubs. But there was another facet to the story. Prior to me entering the sex industry, my boyfriend started watching a lot of porn, and I started watching it with him. It seemed like it was one of the only times that he was actually happy. The rest of the time, he was so moody that anything could set him off. Not enough ice in his Mountain Dew, too much ice in his Mountain Dew, cold French fries, if the house wasn't clean enough, if I made too much noise while I cleaned it. But when he watched porn, he didn't care about all of that. He seemed so enamored with the women, and I remember wishing that he would look at me that way. I didn't like the idea of becoming a stripper. I wanted to get in and out of the industry as fast as possible. But I also hoped that by becoming a stripper, I could get him to look at me the way he looked at women in porn. It never worked. Instead, he started sleeping with my coworkers and getting them to give him their money too. We didn't seem to notice that we were all being pimped. My life unraveled like an episode of the Jerry Springer Show. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he got another girl pregnant and moved her into my apartment because she had no place else to go. They took the bedroom while I slept on the couch. In the midst of all of this, I would go on walks through my neighborhood to an area where there were a number of single-family homes. Looking at the children's toys scattered in the yard beyond the white picket fences and peering through the windows into what looked like healthy, happy, intact families, I dreamed of a day when I would have a home like that. I wanted a marriage and children, all with the same last name. Never mind the fact that I wasn't making any choices that would have brought me one step closer to this dream of mine. It was during this time in my life when I met a girl in ballet class whose friendship changed my life. Through her love and care, she showed me the unconditional love of God. She invited me to church, and I constantly turned her down. I thought if there was a God, and I wasn't so sure there was, then surely he wouldn't want anything to do with a girl like me. Her friendship with me was never contingent on me attending church. Eventually, I saw something in her life that I wanted. She seemed so joyful and full of life, and if church was the way to finding this, I finally got to a place where I was willing to try it out. When I showed up to church for the first time, I immediately had a sense that I was home. I was determined to get there anytime the doors open, even though it meant changing my job at the strip club so I could show up late for a shift on Wednesday nights. At church, I began learning that I am loved and valued and purposed. And this truth, yep, amen. As this truth sunk into my heart, it became a game changer. It became more and more difficult to live in a way that contradicted it. Finally, one night I heard a man share his testimony. He talked about being a drug addict and living on the streets and how God had radically changed his life. He shared the scripture in John 15:5 that says, "I am the vine and you are the branches. Remain in me, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, man can do nothing." I realized that I was like the withered branch mentioned later in the scripture. I was disconnected from God and my life was going nowhere. I felt like I was dying. From that day forward, I made a decision to commit my life to Jesus and that I was going to do whatever it took to live the fruitful life he had called me to live. He began to fill the deep voids in my life that had caused me to search for my significance in a man. He began to satisfy the places in me that I tried to fill with material things. I quit stripping, left my abusive boyfriend/pimp, and committed myself to live completely for him. Amen. I even made a commitment to take a break from dating or even pursuing intimate friendships with men for 6 months. This was a huge feat for a serial monogamist like me. After the dating break was over, and I mean right after it was over, like the day it ended, I started dating a guy I met at church. Love addict much? Okay. He had been in church since he was 15. He was in leadership and he was respected by many. And he had a quickly growing career in the Christian music industry. To top it all off, he was a virgin. I didn't even know that such a thing as a 25-year-old virgin existed. He was a dream come true. Thankfully, I knew enough to know that Jesus himself was my one true knight in shining armor. But in my newfound love, I thought I had found a pretty close second. In my newfound faith, I found grace, healing, forgiveness, redemption, and wisdom for my life. But if I'm honest, I also thought I had found the perfect formula for the perfect life. I was determined to get my white picket fence dream after all. We dated for 3.5 years before getting married. We did everything by the books, literally. We read the marriage books, did the premarital counseling, did everything that we thought good Christian couples were supposed to do in dating. They say the first year of the marriage is the hardest, and for me, it couldn't have been easier. I married my best friend. We laughed together constantly, prayed together, and he was incredibly supportive of the purpose of God in my life. During the first year of marriage, I returned to UCLA to complete a master's in social welfare. As I pursued my degree, God simultaneously put a call in my heart to reach women trapped in the sex industry like I once was. In 2003, with the support of my pastors and local church, I founded an outreach and support group to women in the sex industry called Treasures. I began to see how God not only wanted to set me free from my past, but he wanted to use it to bring freedom to others. My husband was fully supportive of this vision too. The only time we hit a roadblock in marriage seemed to be centered around the issue of appearance. Every once in a while, he would make note of the fact that he thought I could stand to lose a couple of pounds or dress a little bit more like this or that. The weight stuff was a huge trigger for me since I had dealt with body image issues since I can remember and began dieting in the 4th grade. But every time we had a discussion about this, he would retract his statements and tell me that I'm beautiful just the way I am and he'd apologize. Each time I found myself feeling a little bit more insecure. On and off throughout our relationship, he would attend accountability groups at church centered on porn and sex addiction. I really didn't think anything of it. After all, isn't it every man's battle? I took comfort in the fact that he was healthy enough to pursue accountability for these things and couldn't actually imagine him acting out on any of it. 5 years into marriage, we were pregnant, and I was one step closer to my dream of having a family. 3 months into the pregnancy, we had a miscarriage. At the same time, several of our friends were getting divorces, and my husband began touring in the secular market. And I noticed what started out as casual social drinking quickly turned into binge drinking. I tried to control his drinking habits by asking him not to drink when he was touring. When that didn't work, I asked him to adhere to 2 drink maximums. That didn't work either. Ironically, even though my father is sexually addicted and I had been dating sexually addicted men and boys all my life, I knew nothing about sexual addiction. So when my husband confessed to having cheated on me with several women while he was on tour, I was completely blindsided. I took comfort in the fact that he was the one to confess it. And since he had been drinking when he cheated, I attributed his cheating to his drinking and thought that as long as he didn't drink, our marriage would be fine. I was determined not to lose my white picket fence dream and resolved to do whatever it took to get our marriage back on track. For me, that meant putting it behind us and moving forward as fast as we could. Forgive and forget. And when it came to the issue of why he cheated or what relational factors could have led us into this situation, I made it clear that it was his problem and he had to deal with it. I focused all of my attention on trying to control his drinking habits. Things seemed to be back under control. He took a break from touring, he didn't seem to be drinking, and we both started building new friendships in a married connect group at church. Once again, we were pregnant. Towards the end of my pregnancy, he started going out late and coming home drunk. I tried setting curfews, limits on who he could hang out with and how much he could drink. None of it worked. The asks and expectations were all about trying to control his behavior so that I could feel safe. My addiction became trying to control his addictions. I had no idea how to set a healthy boundary or how to state what I wanted and needed. As long as I was owning his addiction by trying to control his choices and outcomes and quickly cleaning up his messes to keep pressing onto my white picket fence dream, he never had to face any consequences for his choices. It seemed that the more I took the reins in the relationship, the more he seemed to let go of them. And at the end of the day, I felt more like a controlling, nagging mother than a wife to him. As our marriage sank deeper and deeper into a state of disrepair, a friend of mine suggested that I talk to her sister who was involved with COSA meetings at Saddleback, now COA. I knew something was severely wrong in my marriage. I sensed that my husband had been hiding something from me, and I finally came to him and asked him to come clean about whatever it was. He confessed that he had kissed another girl towards the end of my pregnancy, and by that point, several months had passed. I already had my daughter, and desperate for solutions, AKA ideas on how to fix my husband and my marriage, I finally called my friend's sister. In our first conversation, I remember her saying, "What I have learned is that often when there has been an affair, there is a sexual addiction at the root of it." Hearing her say this was like stumbling through the dark and having someone turn on a floodlight. I knew in my gut that she was right. I sobbed and sobbed, partially because the truth was breaking through all of my denial about the state of our marriage, and partially because I was relieved. I found hope in the idea that if I could finally identify the problem, I could begin to find true solutions. Today, this awesome woman is my sponsor. At one point, a well-meaning woman at church suggested that the solution to my marital issues was to have more sex with my husband. Being the good perfectionist that I am, I wanted to make sure that I did the right thing for my marriage, but nothing about that advice felt right to me. I was processing this with my sponsor when she began asking me questions like, "What do you need to feel safe? What do you want? How do you feel about this?" It never occurred to me that what I want, need, and feel was a factor in anything. As it turns out, deciphering what I want, need, and feel instead of owning what everyone else wants, needs, and feels has been an integral part of my recovery journey. Faced with these questions for the first time, I realized that not only did I not want to have more sex with my husband, but it was time to set some boundaries about what I needed to feel safe in our marriage. There weren't any COSA meetings in my area, so every Friday, I loaded up my then 10-month-old daughter and drove 74 miles in LA traffic from Northridge to Saddleback to come to the meeting. 74 miles with a baby in the back. LA traffic, LA, Los Angeles, California traffic, okay. Sometimes the drive would take me 4 or 5 hours, but I was desperate enough to do it. 2 months after I started attending meetings on my first Mother's Day, my husband confessed that he had been having multiple ongoing affairs for nearly a year. I felt like I was losing everything I had ever wanted and worked for, and no matter how hard I tried to maintain the fairy tale marriage, I couldn't make my husband choose me. I couldn't make him fight for our marriage. I couldn't make him stop drinking. I could only take responsibility for my own choices. I was forced to face my powerlessness. At that point, I asked my husband to leave our home, and although we were separated, I was seeking God for answers and stayed open to reconciliation. After all, I knew God to be healer and restorer and fully believed that he could heal and restore my marriage. However, rather than focusing on how to control and manipulate the outcome of my marriage or trying to get to help God restore my marriage by being the fixer that I had always been, I focused on pursuing my own recovery. For the first time, I watched my husband make his own choices without trying to control him, and I realized that thankfully, my recovery did not depend on his recovery. That I could become healthier and whole whether or not he made a choice to get better. Praise the Lord. I also began to realize that every relationship I had had since I was 14 was with guys who struggle with sexual addiction, and that the common denominator was me. I was choosing them. I discovered that there was a part of me that felt safer in relationships with people who did not require me to engage in healthy emotional intimacy. People who were happy to have surface level sexualized relationships because I didn't have to really show up and risk being vulnerable. In terms of whether or not to file for a divorce, I didn't want to take any action without hearing from God. I needed a word from God, so I fasted and prayed and fasted and prayed and fasted and prayed. I just wanted some direction because as long as I knew what to do, I could try to get back some semblance of control. After 80 days of fasting and praying, I finally complained to someone I trust. I have been fasting for 80 days for a word from God, and all I can hear is wait. I need a word from him. You guys already know. My confidant gently delivered the news, wait is a word. So I waited and waited and waited, and at one point I asked God, why am I waiting on this man? He isn't doing anything to show me he's choosing our marriage. God kindly reminded me that it was never my husband I was waiting on, but God himself. I don't know if he would have been able to do a restoring work in me if I wasn't in that waiting place, desperately seeking him. It was in the waiting place that I was given an opportunity to learn surrender. I learned that in all of my searching for control, I was trying to take the place of God. And as it turns out, according to step 1, I am not God. I continued to wait for over a year until God made it clear to me that it was time to file for divorce. And then I found myself waiting on the courts in a process that I have come to believe was God's sovereignty. The court denied my divorce a total of 5 times. It took almost 3 years from the time I was separated for it to be finalized, and all of that just gave me more time to wait and more time to surrender. Although my husband had broken our wedding vows, I was committed to upholding the vow that I made, and therefore dating was out of the question for that 3-year period. If it weren't for this season of waiting and the divorce had been finalized sooner, I wonder if I would have been tempted to jump into another relationship and rob myself of the opportunity to experience a more complete healing. There is a line in the Serenity Prayer that asks God to help us to accept the hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. That always stuck out to me because so much of my energy was spent trying to fix and control circumstances and the people around me in order to create life as I would have it. Clearly, this didn't work. In the midst of all of this, I lost my home, my credit was ruined, and I felt like one by one, all of the safety nets that I had set up for myself and the life that I was trying to build was completely dismantled. Life was not as I would have it. At one point, I found myself truly grieving this and said to God, it didn't turn out how I thought it would. I cried to God, it wasn't supposed to turn out this way. God listened, and then he spoke to my heart. I rescued you. The absurdity of this statement was almost laughable. There was nothing about what I was going through that even remotely resembled rescuing. Harmony, I rescued you. I was perplexed. He had my attention. I rescued you from your version of the dream, and I will redeem the dream. This promise that God would redeem the dream and that he would restore family to me carried me through. Most days I held on to it, but when the truth of it felt faint and distant, my friends would lovingly remind me of it. God will redeem the dream. He will restore family to you. This was his promise. There was a point when I accepted the fact that it might not come in the form of marriage. Perhaps he meant that he would simply surround me with such incredible friends that they would become family to me. He has done that, and I am thankful. I resolved that I would be okay with this and tried to tuck away that desire in my heart to sit at a dinner table with a family of my own, to partner in life with someone with whom I could share a dream and vision, responsibilities, challenges, laughter, and tears. I minimized my want for these things just in case God didn't come through in this way. But he had a question for me. Harmony, what do you want? It was the same question my sponsor asked me on our first call together. I began to understand that God wanted me to engage with him in sharing my wants and needs, and that the practice of this is a part of true intimacy. I finally fessed up. I told God what I wanted, to be married again, and not just any marriage. I told him that I wanted a marriage that is strong and growing and rooted in God, where we laugh together and love each other passionately, where we're satisfied and content and sure in our marriage because we are confident in God as our foundation. I told God that I wanted a marriage where our home is filled with love, where we enjoy spending time together as a family, where we're growing as parents, where we're in the moment with our children and enjoying and celebrating life. One where they are secure and confident in building a strong relationship with God. A marriage where we have a healthy life rhythm with balanced time for work, rest, and play. I spent the next several years after the divorce as a single mom with this dream in my heart, and the waiting continued. I've been given permission to do this, so the first time I shared this testimony, I want to read the old ending because God is constantly writing our stories, right? It's never over. Right? But I want to show this, read the old ending, and Cheryl said I could. So this was the old ending when I first shared. Life is not what I thought it would be. Being a single mother and carrying out the responsibility of running a ministry was not my plan, but I wouldn't trade one moment of this journey for the work that God has done in me. I know that he is a redeemer, and I trust him to make all things right as I surrender to his will. In the meantime, I am not only content with my current circumstances, I am filled with joy and expectation for my future. That was the old ending. Thank you. This is the new ending. Praise Jesus. On March 14th, 2015, God redeemed the dream and restored family to me. I married a man that has surpassed my desires. He is a safe person who demonstrates respect and love for my daughter and me through all of his actions. We laugh together and dream together. He has wiped my tears when I am grieving and cooked me chicken noodle soup when I am sick, from scratch, no bouillon. I don't even know how to do that. He uses like the chicken to make his own broth, like the bones. God has given him a heart for treasures, and not just because he loves me. He actually volunteered for treasures years before we were ever on each other's radar. Now he is the director of Men for Treasures and leads all of our male volunteers. And he has a vision to see men who used to participate in the demand take the funds they used to spend towards the sex industry and redirect it towards organizations like Treasures that are bringing restoration and recovery to women. In my marriage today, I am committed to loving and supporting him without fixing him. I am committed to true intimacy, to knowing my husband and being known by him, to sharing my wants, needs, and feelings, even when it's hard and feels vulnerable. And what I went through with my ex-husband was very difficult and painful. Truth be told, though I never want to go through those things again, I still would not trade one moment of it for what I've gained. God used that season to do a deep healing work in me. He used it to teach me how to love myself and set healthy boundaries with the people around me. He used it to teach me about reciprocal friendships and what true emotional intimacy looks like with safe people. I also grew in my leadership capabilities. By God's grace, today Treasures is thriving more than ever. We continue to reach and serve women in the sex industry, and the vision has expanded to a global scale as we train other leaders to replicate this model of outreach and care in their cities. To date, Treasures has had the opportunity to train over 100 outreaches on 6 continents. During that season, I grew in my faith that God is in fact good, that his character can be trusted, his plans are good. He taught me that the circumstances of my life do not change these facts. He taught me to stand on these truths even when I didn't see evidence of them. Today, I see his goodness all around me, in my husband when he tucks my daughter in at night and tells her how precious she is, in the rich friendships I have gained, in the way God has continued to show up in times of grieving and times of celebration. He has even done a restoring work in my relationship with my ex-husband. My ex-husband is a committed and faithful father to our daughter now, and we have a very healthy co-parenting relationship. He and my husband have a mutual respect and even liking for each other and often sit side by side at my daughter's school performances and important events. We all work together. A miracle. We all work together to love, care for, and support my precious baby girl. Honestly, it's a miracle. God is faithful. He is a redeemer. And I am thankful. Thank you for letting me share. Aw, you guys are kind. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thanks. First of all, I'm just so honored to be here. Thank you. Thank you. And then I just want to quickly let you guys know that tomorrow I will be doing a workshop in the refinery court, refinery court, I think it's called, before lunch. And I'm going to be talking about sexual exploitation and trafficking, its connection to the commercial sex industry, and some of the myths that our culture believes about porn. So I invite you guys all to come to that workshop, and I'd love to see you there. All right, thank you.